All advice given is for general information purposes. All legal cases are different, and you should seek the advice of your own attorney before acting or making decisions. No attorney-client privilege applies to communications on this show, and no attorney-client relationship is created by calling or writing in. Attorney Rominger practices only in Pennsylvania and maintains his primary office in Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Hey, good afternoon. Carl Rominger here, 540-0580. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about this lockdown in Boston yesterday, or 2 days ago, whenever that was. The lockdown concept of putting 1 million people in their homes and ordering them not to come out and then going door to door searching for somebody. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to save that for a little later in the hour here, but we are going to talk about it. I just want to let you know I'm going to be over at the CAO La Traviata wrapped up tour with Rick Rodriguez today. That's over at Harrisburg Beer and Cigar at 3842 Union Deposit Road, Harrisburg. So at 3 o'clock when the show's over, I'm going to slide over there and smoke a couple cigars. You're welcome to join me. It's quite a little event. I think you have to buy a ticket when you get over there, but you get some good stuff. A lot of good you can get a VIP ticket. You can get a limited edition box, a cutter, all kinds of things. But anyhow, it's over at Harrisburg Beer and Cigar. It starts today at 3 o'clock and goes till 7 p.m. So I'm going to slide over at 3. So if anybody wants to come over and smoke a cigar, you're welcome to join me. And I want to thank them for the beer they gave me the other day to try, a Sam Adams Double Bock and a Yingling Bock. And I'd recommend both of them. The Sam Adams is a stronger, heavier session-style beer, and the Yingling Bock, like I said before, is just a good lunch beer. Also, May 9th at 7 p.m., I'm going to be down in Franklin County. Not York County. Somebody asked me that. Franklin County. That's Chambersburg. That's down south on 81 at the 912 Patriots in Chambersburg, giving a gun law lecture on the Second Amendment, Castle Doctrine, taking questions, etc. at the Franklin Fire Company in Chambersburg, 158 West King Street, Chambersburg, PA. And on May 18th from 9 a.m. until about showtime, I'm going to be at the Spooky Nook Sports Center at the Lancaster County Women's Expo. Just going to let you know where I'm going to be. Melody, you're on WHP 580 with Carl Rominger.
Are you asking for Melody?
No.
Oh,
yes, well, Melody, it's you. You're on the air.
Okay. You know, there's a delay, so we don't always hear who you're saying.
Yeah, I know. I'm teasing you.
Okay. This is my third time of getting Rominger on the phone. I have a landlord-tenant question.
Okay, what's going on?
We have a lease that says that we can come into the house and show it to prospective tenants. I got a tenant that has given their notice that they're breaking their lease, and they have been uncooperative to me being able to show it. What can I do?
So, what do you mean by being able to show it?
To show it for rent.
Okay. So you want to show it for rent, and they're still in there?
Yes.
Well, the short answer is, does the lease have a provision about that?
Yes, the lease says that they have to give us access to be able to show it.
Okay. Well, then it would be a breach of their lease term not to do that, and it would be something you could evict them on that basis for. It would also potentially open them to a claim of damages because they may delay your ability to rent it, so they may also be liable for you not only for any rent or lease break, but also any consequential or incidental damages, which would include the delay in renting the place. So okay. I would remind them of that.
Okay.
And what are they saying? No, or?
Well, they were giving the excuse that they have a grandbaby that's coming to live with them, that they don't want the germs in the house because they've been in the NICU. But the baby's not even home from the hospital yet.
Right.
And now they won't tell me when the baby's coming home, so that I don't know if it's there or not.
Sounds like poppycock to me.
Yeah, I think so too.
Sounds like they don't want to clean up, or they're doing something, making meth or something in the apartment they don't want you to see.
Or they don't want me to be able to rerun it.
Right.
Is there anything going forward in leases that I can put in to make it better than just putting that in? Or?
You could put that they will give you reasonable access, but that if other arrangements aren't made, then you should be allowed to show with 24 hours notice.
Okay.
And that way, when you show up and they try to say, well, that doesn't work for us, you can say, your lease is pretty clear. I try to, if we can't reach a mutually convenient time, then I only have to give you 24 hours notice.
Okay, the problem is you go there with a prospective tenant and you're having a fight with them at the door.
That's true.
You know?
By that may, it should only happen once.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I know. There's no good answer to bad tenants, trust me.
Yes, I know. We have pretty good tenants for the most part, but once in a while you get one.
I know. Melody, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you,
All
Carl.
Right, bye. 540-0580. Mike.
How's Carl today?
Not too bad.
I used to be a landlord. You get good tenants. It's pretty lucrative, but you get some tough ones that are pretty hard to get out, and there's no picnic. It's take the good with the bad when you're being landlord. But that's not what I called. Not that I advocate drinking and driving, but I saw something in the paper the other day in two different papers about the Supreme Court ruled on DUI blood test.
Yes.
Did you see that? I didn't understand what they were talking about. It sounded like if you refuse one, they have to get a court order.
Yeah, here's what's going to happen. In Pennsylvania, it's not going to make a practical difference. We don't allow for the warrantless taking of blood generally in Pennsylvania. So for us, it doesn't make a difference. But other states have allowed police officers to take blood without a warrant when the person refuses to voluntarily give it. And what they've said is that there's an exigency. So there's an exception. We're going to talk a little bit about this actually a little later in the show here when I talk about Boston. But the concept is an exigent circumstance, which means basically fancy legal word for emergency or something that's happening that requires immediate action. And so sometimes police officers, for instance, don't have to wait for a warrant if something happens which would cause them to believe that the evidence is dissipating, okay? Mm-hmm. So one of the famous ones is the police see somebody, they're ready to raid a drug house, and somebody spots them, and that person goes running into the house. They would then say there's an exigency. We were waiting for the warrant to be signed by the magistrate while we were gathering around the house, but we saw this known drug courier spot us and run right into the house in a panic.
Right. It's just to stop the paperwork and get going.
Get going, because we know what's happening is they're going to start flushing the drugs down the toilet.
Right.
So there's an exigency. Evidence is about to disappear. So in this case, what the court said is that putting a needle into a human body is such an intrusive form of search that most of the time, interestingly, think about this, most of the time.
Yeah, it was ambiguous.
Right. Most of the time, it's not going to be a valid search without a warrant. And they also pointed out that in the modern era, and I agree with this, that a lot of warrants are easily obtained by radio or telephone. In other words, you can get, and there's precedent for this in most states, to get a verbal warrant. Judge, here's the situation. And the judge says, okay, for the moment, I'll give you permission. So,
well, in Pennsylvania, are you saying that if they take you in to get a blood test, they have to get a court order for that in Pennsylvania?
They do if you don't consent.
Oh, if you don't consent.
But, of course, if you don't consent, then PennDOT's going to wax you, and they'll use that against you in your prosecution.
Oh, yeah, I think it's refusal.
Yes.
Like a year automatic.
Now, you could imagine scenarios where refusal might be in your best interest, where, for instance, somebody has been killed and maybe a BAC is going to be really high, off the charts high.
Right.
If you could refuse successfully or dodge the blood test somehow, you might think that's in your best interest. On the other hand, the government's going to want to know. And so in some states, they've said historically, yes, that's a point where we can take it without a warrant, use it. And the Supreme Court just finally came around and said, no, we're not calling that an exigency usually, which is, of course, that ambiguity we were just talking about.
Yeah, well, that explains that. And like I said, I'm not advocating drink and drive. If you don't do it, then you don't have to worry about it. But I was just curious.
No, and that's the problem with search and seizure type law. It only really comes up, generally speaking, when somebody's actually done something wrong. So, one of the judges in Franklin County, the old President Judge Walker, said to me one time, which was his joke. He goes, "Did you ever notice that every time the police violate the Constitution, they find drugs in the trunk of the car?" and
awful convenient.
But the point being is those are the only ones that make it to court, because if you were just driving down the road and police officers started popping trunks left and right, just making people open them, it would really only usually get to court when somebody gets a set of criminal charges.
Right.
So the people who have committed the bad acts, who then have lawyers raising the constitutional issues, are actually defending everybody's right to be free of unnecessary searches and seizures.
That That makes sense to me, and I do think. I mean, if you mess up, as long as they catch you legally, that's
yeah. And that's the idea. Is it's the
circumvent the system.
The exclusionary rule, which is what causes evidence to be suppressed, was invented by the Supreme Court years ago because they said there's no way to make law enforcement follow the rules except to say if you don't follow the rules, you won't get your prosecution. So just follow the rules.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. I got to go to break.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. 540-0580. When we get back, we'll talk with Roy.
If it matters to you, it matters to us. WHP Talk Radio 580.
All right, we're back. 540-0580. Bottom of the hour here. When we come back at the bottom of the hour, I'm going to talk about Boston and the lockdown and how that all interplays. I think it's kind of interesting. A lot of misconceptions out there. These guys obviously are dirtballs. We got one in custody. I don't know why anybody would want to survive after they did something like that. I guess he chickened out at the last minute or what happened. But it'll be interesting to learn whether they have any connections to any larger organizations because we're going to talk about that too. Roy, you're on the air.
Hey, this is Roy.
Yep, what's going on?
Well, my ex and I got divorced in another state. She moved to West Virginia. I moved to Pennsylvania so I could be within 2 hours to be close to the kids. And she's actually living with her parents, and her parents have constantly been alienating the children against me and not upholding according to the custody agreement of allowing me to have daily access to them by phone and video chat and stuff like that. They're constantly denying me the ability to see the children on the weekend and stuff that I'm supposed to have them. And, I don't have the funds to be able to get an attorney and try to do something with it. So I'm not really sure what the best step to do. I understand possibly doing something called domesticating the decree that was issued in the other state into West Virginia where the children are, or can I bring it into Pennsylvania and then use the courts here to be able to try to enforce it?
Where is the order from originally? So I'm clear on this.
Hawaii.
So if the order is from Hawaii, the Interstate Compact on Custody, which I believe all the states have signed on now, require Hawaii to relinquish jurisdiction. So you've got to have an attorney in Hawaii petition Hawaii to release jurisdiction, and then it goes to the home state of the child, which at this point would probably be West Virginia if that's where the child's been for more than 6 months.
That's correct.
So you would usually the way this would work. Let's assume you're in Pennsylvania because I don't know West Virginia law. Okay,
right.
I can only explain it as if the child were in Pennsylvania. I would file a Pennsylvania action and simultaneously get a lawyer in Hawaii to ask the court to relinquish jurisdiction there. When Hawaii relinquished jurisdiction, then Pennsylvania could take over, and you would bring that order in and seek modification or enforcement of it. Okay.
Now, doing it myself, like I said, I don't have funds to,
So you're going to have to file something in Hawaii, asking Hawaii to relinquish jurisdiction and saying, hey, Judge, here's what's going on. We haven't been in Hawaii since blank. Hey, Judge, the kid now resides in West Virginia since blank. I reside in Pennsylvania, so we want jurisdiction to be released by Hawaii so I can file in West Virginia.
Okay.
And then you go down and file in West Virginia. And beyond that, I have no idea what to do in West Virginia.
Right. Now, would I take the whole decree to West Virginia, or can I move the rest of it to Pennsylvania?
I think everything's going to West Virginia if that's where the kid is.
Well, the children are there, and that's the custody issue, but there's also other...
The marital portions?
Yeah, marital portions.
Marital portions, I don't know. It seems to me you can sue the defendant wherever they can be found, wherever the contract was created. So I still think you're Hawaii or West Virginia.
Okay.
All right?
Okay, appreciate it.
All right, boss. Good luck.
Yeah.
540-0580. Carl Rominger here answering your legal questions, whatever you guys want to talk about. Of course, caller touched on a little earlier, the Supreme Court issued a major ruling on whether or not taking your blood was an intrusion and left a very ambiguous answer, basically saying someday we'll weigh the need again on a case-by-case basis against the exigencies of the circumstance. And at the bottom of the hour when we come back, I'm going to talk about exigency as it applies in the Boston arena up there and all the things that went on up there. But let me leave you with a little tidbit here, too. First of all, there is no such thing as a reference to martial law in the United States Constitution. And there's no prohibition on martial law or reference to it. There is something that talks about the writ of habeas corpus, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And Abraham Lincoln suspended that. Let's see. Well, the habeas corpus, let's touch on that. The Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2 demands that, quote, the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in case of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. So what is that, though? What is the writ of habeas corpus? Is it the right not to have martial law? No. In fact, habeas corpus is not a right against unlawful arrest. So with or without it, you may be arrested unlawfully. It's a tool for testing unlawful imprisonment. And so a writ of habeas corpus, bring forth the body basically, is this ancient writ to say, hey, this guy's been arrested and being held by the king, or in this case the state or the United States government, illegally, and therefore should be released from imprisonment because there's no legal merit. So long and short of it, keep this in the back of your head, the writ of habeas corpus has nothing to do with the power of arrest. It's the power of release from an unlawful arrest. So basically, when you suspend the writ of habeas corpus, it's basically saying the government can make arrests, legal or illegal, but those that are illegal will not have their normal protection of requiring a court to review the propriety of the detention and the court's ability to force the government to release the unlawfully arrested individual. So if you want to think about it that way, it's a little bit different question. So what is martial law? We're going to talk about that again in about 10 minutes. I want to remind you guys, while I've got you, that I'm going to be going over to Harrisburg Beer and Cigar after the show here. It's at 3842 Union Deposit Road. They're having a CAO La Traviata wrapped-up tour with Rick Rodriguez. It goes from 3 to 7 p.m. There's going to be a lot of cool cigar swag there, T-shirts, snacks, drinks, raffles, prizes. Again, at 3842 Union Deposit Road, Harrisburg Beer and Cigar. And when you get over there, say hello so I know you came, and I'll be happy to say hello too. And you can see what kind of cigars. I smoke these cigars, by the way, Shane. They're pretty good, yeah. Actually, CAO a lot of times is a strong cigar, which I like. The light wrapper version, pretty mild though, so it looks like you could be happy either way. What else did I want to tell you? The Supreme Court is still holding, the Proposition 8 and the Defense of Marriage Act cases, so we should be watching for decisions on those. Historically, the big cases usually get decided last in the session. So probably here in June, May or June, we're going to see something come out on those and get an answer on the propriety of the Defense of Marriage Act and whether or not California's Proposition 8 is legal or illegal. John, you're on WHP 580 with Carl Rominger. What's going on?
Yeah, I was watching the news like 2 o'clock Friday morning, and I saw the police arresting people and making them completely strip.
Where was this?
And this was on the news. It was being broadcast by CBS out of Philadelphia that they were showing people and pixelating somebody's genitals that they arrested and made them strip. I mean, I watched this live, supposedly, and they were doing this. They also had some other guy on the ground with his hands spread out and all that stuff.
Right. How do you not know?
I have no idea who these people were and what the police were doing, but, in lieu of the fact that obviously these weren't the people involved, how did they do that?
Repeat this. So what are they put him on the ground.
Well, on one picture, they had a guy on the ground, sort of spread eagle. They were showing a picture. And they had another picture of a guy that they made strip completely. And they had his genitals pixelated.
Right.
And they were showing this on the CBS out of Philadelphia.
And do we know why they were being arrested?
No.
So
they were implied that these people were involved in this.
They thought potentially they were terrorists or may have been looking for. See,
right, exactly.
Here's the issue. It's pretty normal for people to hide drugs, money, guns, knives, all kinds of things in their nether regions. There was even a guy who was arrested who had an entire pistol inside of his rectum not too long ago.
Right.
So, depending on what the police know or believe, the reasonableness of the search has to be measured against that. So, if we have suspicion that this person has a improvised explosive device strapped to their body somewhere, it may become constitutional to have them stripped down pursuant to an arrest.
Right.
In other words, a mere pat and frisk might not be enough, and even to put them in a vehicle would make it highly dangerous if they in fact had an improvised explosive device on them. So that may be the answer.
Right, but nobody was talking about, how many people did you arrest, or nobody,
right?
Incident to the, because apparently these people threw explosives and stuff like that. But
yeah, and I mean that's the question. The question would be what you know and what's reasonable. And here's the other thing. Let's talk about it this way. I always say if law enforcement really believes that somebody's, armed and dangerous or there's really a problem, go ahead and do what you got to do. The worst thing that happens later is the evidence that you seized gets thrown out, right? I mean, that's the absolute worst thing, but the protection of yourself and the public should be paramount on your mind. And while it may screw up a criminal case later, keeping everybody safe might be in their best interest. On the other hand, we don't want to live in a society where the police routinely strip search everybody.
Right.
I hope.
I mean, they sort of had, whatever description or whatever picture they had, and, this is late at night, early in the morning,
right.
So, but I'm just saying they had this actually on the CBS affiliate from Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's very interesting. All right, my friend, I go to break.
All right, bye.
540-0580. All right, we're back. Carl Rominger here, 540-0580. Lou, what do you want to know? Lou's not available yet, huh? Lou, what's going on?
Oh, okay. This lawyer drew up a will for somebody, and in the will, he inserted a clause that if that he would like to be the lawyer to administer the estate once the patient, the owner of the will pass on. But the beneficiary and executor, also an executor, has his own lawyer that he prefers.
The executor may use whatever lawyer they want. A direction in a will to use a particular lawyer is said to be precatory. Oh. Meaning non-enforceable.
Non-enforceable?
Correct.
Oh, okay, because this lawyer wanted, and I have heard that he's a little expensive.
Right, and it's not mandatory.
It's not, even though it's in the will.
Well, let me put it this way. The person may have put it in there because that's who they wanted you to use, but some things are considered non-binding.
No, this is non-binding, okay.
And the lawyer who's in there, if asked, should tell you that. In other words, if you went to that lawyer and said, do I have to use you? The lawyer may say, well, I actually don't usually put these in my will, but that's what Thelma Jean wanted me to do. She said, put that in there, or I really want you to handle it, and so I did. Or he may say, I put that in all my wills, but nonetheless, he should still tell you that you're still free, because you have an absolute right to pick the attorney you want. the executor has the absolute right to pick the attorney they want as well.
Okay, and one thing more. What's the normal rate for a lawyer to,
to administrate an estate? It depends on the size of the estate. It depends on a lot of things. Depends on the complexity. But you should figure anywhere from a few $1,000s all the way up to tens of thousands of dollars.
Tens of thousands of dollars.
Just depending on what's there and what needs to be done.
Oh, I see. Okay, so, but it's not by the hour or anything like that.
Well, some lawyers do them by the hour.
Okay.
And some lawyers do them on a percentage basis.
Oh.
The problem is each one has a certain benefit. So if we do it on a percentage basis, and there's a lot of hours in, then the estate makes out better. If on the other hand, it turns out that there's very few hours, right? Then on a percentage basis, the estate doesn't do as well.
Okay.
But a lawyer may say, well, I'll do it hourly or I'll do it on a percentage basis, and later on, one might turn out to have been better than the other. But you might not know that in the front end.
Yeah, this shouldn't have any problems at all.
That's what they say.
But
that's what they say.
The owner is really has a little money
right
in it, and that's why I just want to find out which is the best way of doing it to save some money for the beneficiary.
Yeah, it's always a good idea. And the other answer is sometimes you can negotiate with a lawyer, too. You can sit down and say, I see what you want to charge me. I think that's a little high. Here's what I want to pay. And then the lawyer can choose whether to continue to take the business or not.
Yeah, but if that's not professional ethics, if we went to our own lawyer.
Oh, yeah, you can. That's what I mean. But I'm saying is you if you want to use your own lawyer, do you know your own lawyer is cheaper, or you just think your own lawyer is cheaper?
Because we know he's a friend, and also we've been using that same lawyer for a long time.
Yeah, so they have a good established relationship. So sometimes that makes sense. And I'm sure he'll appreciate the business.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
good luck.
I thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
So let's talk about Boston. The United States has never really been placed in martial law as a whole. Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus and did some martial law type things, but didn't officially declare absolute martial law. And martial law is really, how would we say it? I think the best way to say it is that it's military rule by military authorities over designated regions, or it's sort of a military rule. Now, theoretically, in the United States, you can't be under military rule of the United States military because that would violate posse comitatus, which is the idea that the military cannot act in the civilian world. However, Section 1031 of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, just very recently, defined the entire United States as a battlefield, and basically apparently says that the president, through the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. military, to deploy assets in this war zone as he sees fit. So Boston was placed under some kind of, what'd they call it? They were calling it, they had a different term for it. They were calling it shelter in place, I think. Everybody get in your house and shelter in place. And then they were going door to door. And it raises interesting questions, because what is the authority that the governor has to do it? So, for instance, in Louisiana, during Katrina, they placed New Orleans under a form of martial law, but they used a health and safety exception, basically saying, for health and safety under some structure or statutes, everybody has to obey the following edicts. So there's legal precedent, and there's a concept of martial law available. So I don't think it was illegal to lock everybody down if, in fact, it was actually a war zone going on. And again, you never know the extent of these things. Is this the tip of the iceberg, or are these really just two lone wolves? We'll talk about that maybe another day or a little later today. So the government comes to that. So now they place everybody in their house and say you're under curfew. And a curfew is kind of a hallmark of martial law. Get you off the streets. That way the military can control what's going on. Now, who was deployed? Was it the National Guard? Yes. Were there federal military agents deployed? Well, if they were, and they were acting in the conjunction or the force of police, then that may have violated posse comitatus. But posse comitatus is not really a constitutional issue. It's more of a ancient law that was passed here in the U.S. It goes all the way back to crossing the Rubicon when Caesar, says to cross the Rubicon because you couldn't bring the legions into the city of Rome because you don't want the military taking over the civilian authority, and that's why we've always had that. That's why we have a civilian commander-in-chief. Our founding fathers recognized that's very important to keep the military at bay. And, of course, I'm not saying anything bad about military people or anything like that, but historically, if a bunch of guys have all the guns and everybody else has, the thinking caps and the parliament has its votes and things like that, at the end of the day, the guys with the guns are the ones who can enforce their will if they choose. So here in the United States, we've maintained, and our military has a slavish allegiance to civil authority, which is incredibly important and why we've been incredibly successful as a nation. In other words, our military people truly believe in our democracy. So is it a big deal that we allow some military action on our soil? Well, our founding fathers thought maybe it wouldn't be a good idea. And that's why they've originally and historically the U.S. Congress has not allowed that. And the Romans even knew that. But my point on all this is it appears that there was some precedent for that. So now let's talk about going into your house. You have the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. Unreasonable is a balancing test, meaning we can balance reasonable versus unreasonable. It's not an absolute. So it doesn't say you shall be free from search and seizure. It says unreasonable. So the reasonableness, and that's why that caller's question earlier about the DUI case was interesting. The court said, what did I say earlier? That the putting of a needle into the human body is a very intrusive thing and therefore generally will require a warrant before we do anything, but not always. Well, when we have terrorists on the loose who are part of some kind of possibly Islamic extremist group out of Chechnya, I'm not sure. Am I allowed to talk about that, Shane, or is that banned somehow? Okay, I can talk about it. Good. Because theoretically we're not supposed to talk about that. That's the big issue, right? We have to pretend that these were just two crazy lone wolves, that this isn't a war on America, that this isn't a jihad. This has nothing to do with that, but I digress for the moment. So because this is what's going on, the balancing act becomes we want to come into your house to look for this guy. Now notice, they didn't shut the whole country down. They didn't start going in people's houses anywhere and everywhere. Just 1 million homes in the greater Boston area that they shut down. And they start going door to door in the area where they think the person might be. Now, interestingly, they had not gone door to door in the area where they found the guy. I heard some speculation that perhaps that was because they thought he was in that area and they were trying to play it cool and not force the issue. But as you can imagine, if there was a terrorist in your house, you might come to the door and simply say there's nobody here and let the police go about their way. So the forced entry, the balance becomes we need to catch this person. We know them to be extremely armed and dangerous. They throttled a law enforcement agent upon sight. They stole an SUV. They've blown people up. They have explosives. They have guns. They have explosive vests. These are not ordinary run-of-the-mill criminals. So the balancing test, I think, falls in favor of the government to come into your house. What would be interesting question would be during one of these searches if the government found your meth lab or your kilo of cocaine or your pot pipe and they chose to arrest you over that, whether or not you would have standing to say that this warrantless search was impermissible, because if the police can get in on an exigency, anything else they see is fair game. I doubt they were doing too much of that. I'm sure they were very busy looking for this person and probably let the pot pipes go. The other interesting question is thinking about how gun-free is Boston and its suburbs. I'd like to believe that here in central Pennsylvania, if one of these guys tried to shelter in most of the average listener's home, there might be a problem. So Anyhow, I got to go to break, and we'll talk a little bit more. I want to hear what you guys think about Boston up there. 540-0580. See you in a minute. All right, so talking a little bit about what's been going on in Boston. I'm going to take Joan's call real quick, and then we're going to go back to the Boston issue. Joan, what's going on?
Well, I was involved in my first auto accident in 60 years.
Okay.
Got a concussion.
Ouch.
The other person's fault. I have about 7,000 or 8,000, excuse my voice, I'm hoarse, in medical bills.
Okay.
And I'm ready to settle. I have full tort per your advice.
Excellent.
1 year ago. What can I expect next?
Well, if you're ready to settle, are you dealing with an insurance agent on your own?
Yes.
You're not going to get enough.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is we need to make sure that any medical liens are taken care of. And you're probably on Medicare, if I had to guess.
Yes.
So we would need to do some work with Medicare to get a certified lien. Otherwise, later you're going to get a bill for that amount of money. So we need to know how much money has to go to them. Number two, we're going to want to look at any long-term consequence, any impairment, pain, suffering, and then we're going to want to calculate an amount based on that. So with that little information I have for you, I would tell you, let me ask it this way. If they offered you $10,000 or $15,000, how would you feel about that?
I wouldn't take it.
Good. And then if they offered you $40,000, what would you think?
I would.
Okay, right. So you're getting into the right range.
My car was totaled.
Yeah. Now the car's a separate issue. That should have been paid for separately.
Yes, it was.
Right. So that doesn't really count. The total, though, does tell us about the extent of the potential injury. So my advice is you've got to be very careful in settling it. And probably if you came and saw a lawyer who would take 25% of any settlement, you would probably end up with more net money than if you didn't use a lawyer. I can tell you I had a police officer I represented a few years ago who worked on his own case all the way up till the statute of limitations. And, we tripled what they'd offered him. And he's, kind of laughing about it, like, what happened? And I said, the difference is they're not sure you're going to sue. They're going to keep stringing you along hoping you miss the statute of limitations. And they're never going to offer you what it's worth because they're just going to keep going incrementally trying to find some value. So generally when you try to settle them on your own, I don't think you do as well even after attorney's fee than you would before.
So the first offer, you could just tell them it's not what you're,
You can tell them whatever you want. You don't have to agree to anything that they offer.
And do they come back to you?
Well, do they come back to you?
Most of the time, okay, we'll
they may come up $1,000 or $2,000 for you. They may come. They're not. You've got to show them. I mean, and I'm not going to tell you how to do this because obviously it's my job. But I would go out and gather a lot of things that probably you aren't even thinking of yet, and those are the things that I present to them to show them what it's going to look like if they go to court.
Okay.
All right.
I thought lawyers usually charge 30%.
We quite often charge a quarter if we don't have to go to court. Depends on the value of the case, the complexity of it. But in an auto accident like yours, it sounds pretty straightforward. A lot of times we go 25%.
Okay. So I could get in touch with you?
Absolutely.
All right. And if I did not have full tort, what difference would that have made?
It makes a huge difference. You would only get your out-of-pocket medical bills and your lost wages.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for
right.
telling us that.
Yes, so the reminder for all the other callers is get full tort.
Yes, I really appreciate it.
All right, Joan. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Dan, you're on WHP 580.
Hey, Carl, in light of the recent gun control nonsense that we heard, if we can just save one life with this legislation, it's worth doing. It's worth restricting your rights if we can just, save one life. And I have to laugh because it turns out one of the individuals, the suspects, shall we call them, these fine young gentlemen,
right,
was on a terrorist watch list. If we could just deport all fine young gentlemen like that on terrorist watch list, if we could just save one life by deporting all fine young gentlemen on terrorist watch lists. Why shouldn't we do that, Carl?
Well, I mean, listen, these guys were just two lone wolves, not radicalized by anything but probably the Republican Party, right? And they have no connection to Islam and no connection to Chechnya. Oh, by the way, we're not allowed to talk about Chechnya because the Russians have said that, and I read an article on this, and I find it to be credible, that from Bill Clinton on, Russian policy has included that if the United States wants to get along, they expect us not to speak on the Chechnyan issue whatsoever. And
do you remember, Carl, when the media tried to make us feel sorry for those Chechen rebels, how they were the underdogs and the mean Russians were so awful until what did they do? They butchered some children in a school. And all of a sudden these Chechen freedom fighters, sometimes they were called freedom fighters, I believe, instead of rebels. And these poor, downtrodden individuals, all of a sudden, they were so desperate that they decided to butcher kids and set them on fire in a school. Oh,
yeah,
it must be awful.
And so, just so we're clear on this, these Chechen separatists and these revolutionaries are Islamic fundamentalist extremists. And I have a whole problem, and I'm gonna. And it's not.
How dare you, Carl? He didn't even have a beard.
Right,
How
he didn't have a beard.
You?
And
how dare you?
Here's my other thought on this, and I hold this against all extremists of all religions. I've said this. I said it was a shame that Eric Rudolph was able to bomb at the Olympics and then find comfort from people here in the United States when he was on the lam. He was being fed and supported by people who claimed to be Christian, who felt that because he was bombing abortion clinics that he somehow deserved aid and comfort. Well, it's the same thing with the Muslim extremists. I have no truck for and no sympathy for any Islamic person who gives any aid or comfort to these guys, even though they say, well, I wouldn't blow something up, but he's fighting a jihad, so I'll leave some, I'll send some money. It's the same as the Irish Catholics who used to put $25 in an envelope to send it over so that Irish extremists could blow up, British school kids. My point is, until the religious groups, the mainstream religious groups, disassociate themselves absolutely and make it clear to their memberships that the extremists are extremists who should have no support and no sympathy, we're going to continue to have this problem.
I will agree to disagree. I don't think there's any correlation between fundamentalist Christians and extremists.
So wait, stop for one second. Stop. Wait. Do you agree? Do you agree that anybody should have given Eric Rudolph food and comfort as he hid after he bombed innocent people?
I totally disagree.
Why did they do that? They did that because they thought he was doing the right thing. That's what God wanted him to do.
Well, apparently NBC didn't call him a Christian fundamentalist. So they brought him up in the context of this whole thing, and they called him a white supremacist.
But I just want to point out that he was getting aid and comfort from people who thought they were doing a godly thing.
Well, they would.
There's no difference between a Christian extremist and an Islamic extremist. No difference.
Well, there is a difference when their theology teaches them to kill the infidel. I don't think our theology teaches that.
Which theology? I'm talking about fundamentalist.
I'm talking about fundamentalist Christian theology does not tell them to teach us to kill the infidel, the non-believer. I believe we're taught to reach out to them and if possible convert them. But not kill them.
So explain to me every time somebody shoots an abortion doctor or bombs a clinic why they get some kind of support amongst that segment of the society.
There are nuts in every segment of the society, but the majority. Now,
so you agree? You agree? There's no justification for killing an abortion doctor.
Absolutely, there's no justification for killing any other individual.
Thank you. But I can find you a bunch.
Answer in due time.
I can find you a bunch of people who of a certain stripe will say, no, we wouldn't do it ourselves, but he, was doing something to defend an innocent life. So remember, every time one of these guys goes on trial for shooting an abortion doctor, there's a whole wacky tribe of people that come out to support him. All right, my friend, I got to go to break. When we come back, we'll talk more about this Boston thing.